So it's interesting. I get the question a lot, how do you get a manager? How do you get agents? And I never really quite know how to answer it because I think it's like it's sort of like a weird thing where it happens when it's supposed to happen. And I find that if you're actually looking for agents and looking for managers, very often you end up with what's kind of like a false positive. People who are looking for anyone find you because you're looking for anyone, and then sometimes it's not actually a match. To explain that a little bit more, like when I was in grad school, they would do these like agent nights and manager nights where you'd network and find people, and you're over here like, read my script. And they're like, well, we hear people coming out of UCLA end up getting jobs. So yeah, sure, I'll represent you. But it's not really a match. I find the better matches often come when you write something that's authentically you, it enters the marketplace in an organic way, and then people who have read it on their own come and find you. And here's the thing, like that sucks. Like you want to have control. You want to be able to say like, but I saw that manager and I want them to represent me. But sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. Very often you don't get representation until you're already quote unquote hot. And that sort of sucks. But the way that I got representation, and just in case it's helpful, was basically like, I went through it two ways. First, I got a manager out of grad school, just in the scenario that I just said. Like basically I won this contest, two contests, and a manager read me afterwards. And the weird thing was, like, I was a comedy writer, but in grad school, our first year is, in the TV program, your first year is comedy and your second year is drama. So by the end of my second year, I was a better writer. So all of my drama scripts were better than my comedy scripts, even though none of them were that good. And but this manager read a drama script of mine and wanted to rep me, and I had this comedy feature that I'd like placed at Austin Film Festival and I'd won a Goldwyn Award with, but she liked my drama script better than my comedy feature. And I was desperate for a manager because I thought that was like the way in. So I said, okay, cool. Let's meet. And we had a nice conversation, and she was like, I want to know what you want to write next. And I wrote this short story about a sex scandal in a Catholic high school called Two in the Pink. You can guess how that goes. And she was like, this is too raunchy for me. It's like very out there, and I don't know if it's a tone that's going to get a lot of notice. And I kind of at first started questioning myself, but then I remembered that thing that my professor said, that I know my voice. And I was like, is it me or is it her? And like, sometimes you're wrong, right? Sometimes it is you, but I had other friends read it and other writers give feedback and they loved it. And I was sort of like, oh, she's drama and I'm comedy, we're not a match. And she doesn't like the thing I wrote, so she can't represent me. And then I was kind of nervous about not having representation, especially like a year out of school. But then an older writer told me, no reps are better than bad reps. And look, she's a great manager for somebody else, but not for me. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to have no reps and just be an undiscovered writer and just keep on writing. And that's what I did. And around that time, I started writing on Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. And when I was writing on that web series, it blew up. Like suddenly everyone was watching Awkward Black Girl, and people were emailing me and saying, oh, I saw your name in the credits. It's so cool that you write for that show. And it was super exciting. And simultaneously, I had met with two friends who were assistants at UTA. One was in the book department and the other one was in the features department. And he had read my feature and loved it. And they were assistants. They had no power to represent me, but they were just like, stay in touch, send us everything you write, because they're not going to be assistants forever. So here I was staying in touch with them, sending them shit that I wrote, working on Awkward Black Girl. They recommended me to get an assistant job with Hillary Winston, who is the showrunner on a pilot that ended up not going, but she recommended me to the showrunner of Happy Endings, and I became an assistant on that comedy show that used to be on ABC, Pour One Out, great show. And there I went from knowing zero comedy writers, working comedy writers, to like 16. And when that show unfortunately started to go down, they started recommending me for the Michael J. Fox show to get staffed on that show. And simultaneously, I was still in touch with my friends who were assistants, always stay in touch. And I emailed them and I was like, hey guys, no big deal, but like, I had a feature that placed at Austin Film Festival. I'm writing for one of the hottest web series in town. I've created, oh, I had also created 2 web series of my own. I created 2 web series of my own. I put up a play last week. I work on happy endings with 16 of the funniest people in this town. And I'm up for a couple staffing jobs on my own with no representation. Do you guys think I'm ready for reps now? And they were like, come on in for a meeting. So it was this thing where like, you have to, it's almost like, I think of it like med school. Like you don't get to call yourself a doctor until you've done a few surgeries. It's like, in writing, it's weirdly the same. You kind of have to already have the job to be noticed by the people to give you the job. And if you can't have the job on your own, you're like, how do I do that? Like, how do I get in a room? Create your room. I think like one of the best things I did was my second web series was I created it myself, but I hired people who I wanted to work with, use the term loosely, I didn't pay that much, but I did try and pay people, like sound, makeup, gotta pay them, and hired people who wanted to do the things that they were doing the most. So I had a friend who was like, all I really wanna do is direct. And I was like, great, come direct my web series. I had a friend who was like, I love like deciding what a set looks like and I wanna help out with that. And I was like, great, come do set deck for my web series. And we worked on it together. And then for the last 2 episodes, I had a mini room with friends and like was like, let's punch up the script together. And that meant that I was already being a writer. I was already producing. We like planned the budgets ourselves. I got a call sheet from work and we recreated a call sheet so that we could say like when people should arrive at set, which was my apartment. My neighbors hated me, but that web series to this day still gets me jobs. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to be doing the thing for people to give you the ability to do the thing. And I think representation isn't something that you should be running after, honestly. I think it should be something that is in the background. You need to be doing the work. Do the work, do the work, do the work, and eventually the reps will be calling you. In terms of finding a match, like who's the perfect agent or manager, I think one of the biggest things to look for is who else they represent. And do they represent people whose careers you want? I literally, like when I was on Happy Endings, I was in a room of 16 writers the day before I started the job. I looked up all the credits and I looked up who represented them. And it's literally as simple as like, if you have something like IMDb Pro or Studio System, you can look it up like for real. But I was like literally like Jonathan Groff repped by into Google. It comes up. So you can do that with anyone. It's like rep by, blah, blah, blah. If they've ever been written about, somewhere it says who the repped are, or you know, like agency, agent, whatever. And I looked up everyone and all the people, and also like movies that were coming out and TV shows I loved. I would watch the credits and write down the names of the writers and I'd look up who repped them. And I realized like all the funniest people, all the people whose careers I wanted were repped at UTA. And I was like, oh, I want to be at UTA. And I really didn't have any other reason except that funny people go there and I'm funny, so I want to be over there. And I met with other agencies and there wasn't anything particularly that like turned me off from any agency. It was just like, I like those people. I want to work with them someday. Something tells me that if I'm at the same agency as those people, it might be easier for me to get to work with them someday. So let me go over there. I think the things to look for, like if you have a meeting, even if, you know, if you don't know their whole client list, you might not be able to find like every single person that this one individual that you're meeting with represents, but like, do they understand your work? I know when I went in for my meeting with my current agents, they pitched back to me the shows that I wanted to work on. Like they were like, we can tell your voice is right for this show, this show, this show, and not for this show and not for this show. And I think them knowing what I'm not right for is just as valuable as knowing what I am right for. And the fact that they were saying the things that I thought about myself back to me was what made me feel safe with them, which made me feel like, oh, I can send you something that's in progress and you're not going to like kick me out. You're gonna be like, oh, she's working on it. She's still sorting it out. Let's talk, let's powwow and get this thing better. I also think like, I don't have managers. Ever since that one manager experience, I never really looked for managers again. I think of my writers group as my unofficial managers. They're cheaper too. Bottle of wine to my writers group as opposed to 5% of my salary. So I think there is like this thing in younger writers sometimes to like, younger, by that I mean greener, to like look for managers. And I agree that like validation feels nice and having a manager might make you feel like, oh, I'm part of the tribe. And if that's what you need, then great, go ahead, get a manager. If they're helping you and giving you notes, feel free. For me, I think the pace at which I was writing, I wanted notes from writers. When I was trying to get in the door, I was churning out scripts, and I just had a group of friends who I was like, they were all comedy writers too. We all wanted to apply to the fellowship programs. We all had very strong goals and desires. And we were like, let's meet every week and read each other's scripts and give each other notes and make us good. And make us good, make us great. And they were my managers. Like it worked so well. Like all of us are now staff. That original writers group, we went, like when we started, like 3 of the 4 of us were unemployed, and now we're all staff. We're all on shows like 5 years later, you know, but it's like amazing to see that, like, if you're with people who understand what you're doing and want the same things as you, your peers, your truest friends, it is helpful because then you rise together. The way I think of agents and managers, because I've talked a little bit about like which one, what you need or what you have. I always think of it as an agent closes the deal for the job that you want or got, and a manager guides you to the relationships that get you the deal. A manager also manages your career, and an agent manages this contract. I think you are responsible for your work, as they say, like an agent takes 10% of your salary, so they do 10% of the work. Same thing for managers, either take 10 or 5. You're responsible for the writing. So anytime I've had a friend be like, I called my agent and was like, what were they doing for me? I'm like, you got to give them a contract for them to do something for you. Like, you are responsible for your career. And I think that's important to remember. There is a myth that when you get representation, that there's like a contract that they slide across the table that you look over with a lawyer and you sign it. In fact, representation is just a verbal agreement. My signing meeting was me sitting across from them and saying, okay, yeah, you can represent me, and that was it. It's an understood rule that agents get 10% of your salary, and how that is achieved is they send you, once you book a job, they send you something in the mail that is like a check authorization form. So that's not negotiable, that's just the rule. Managers, sometimes it is negotiable. Sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 5%. Lawyers are 5%. And again, it's always just been a verbal agreement. And so there isn't like, if you go in for a signing meeting, there isn't like a contract. In fact, if there is a contract, that's weird, which goes against what you would think. But it's a verbal agreement. But I say that agreements should be made in print, and breakups should also be made in print. So after that verbal agreement, it's nice to send an email, or for them to send you an email being like, it was great meeting you and we're so excited to work with you. And again, if you decide you don't want to work with a manager or an agent anymore, you should send a breakup email. Don't ghost. Say you get that email one day from an assistant or a junior agent at one of the big agencies, and they say, hey, I saw you just won the Blue Cat screenwriting competition and I'd love to read you. My rule of thumb is to always have something ready to send right away. The worst thing you can say is, I'll get you that in 2 weeks. The best thing you can say is, here you go, latest draft. So if you can, that's why it's important to really be ready and always have your script ready. I have a trick where I have Dropbox on my phone and on my computer, and I have a folder in my Dropbox called working versions. That's literally what I call it. And it's the most recent version of every script that I think is readable. And basically, no matter where I am in the world, if someone is like, hey, I'd love to read that script of yours that I heard about on blah, 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 I can just Dropbox it to them immediately. And I did that as an assistant. I never asked people to read me. And I don't know, like, I've heard varying things about that. Like, some people are like, that's how I got my job, was I asked my showrunner to read me and they liked it. But I was always like, they're so busy, like showrunners are so busy. Why would I bother them with this? I prefer that people ask me to read me, and then I can send them something right away. So if someone ever emails and says like, hey, I'd love to read you, I think the best thing to do is to, in the email, say thank you, and then say the log line of the thing that you're sending them. Like, oh great, I'm attaching my feature project, Blame Candy. It's about a sex scandal in a high school, and it's attached, and it's a dark comedy. And I would say, like, maybe even the log line, when this teacher gets accosted at school by this student, blah, blah, blah unfolds, hijinks ensue, and put the log line in the email and send it. I also think if you know that there's a thing, a type of project, like if you look up this person and you see that, oh, they do a lot of genre stuff, like they do a lot of horror and like sci-fi, and for some reason the script they're asking me to read or asking from me is not that genre, but I know what they really love, then sometimes I would say you can add one other script, only one, so a max of 2, send them the thing that they asked for, and then if you want, add one other thing. I also saw that you love blah, 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 so I want to also send you this other amazing script that I wrote, and that's the log line for this script, and attach them. Rule on attachments, I would say is a good idea to, when you name the attachments that you put in the email, title of script, underscore, your last name. You don't know how many scripts I get from people that it's just like PSLT1444 draft 7. And I'm like, what is that? And then when I save it on my computer, I'm like, where'd it go? Put your name in the title of the thing, because then they'll remember your name, because every time they open it up to read, they'll be like, oh, Devin Sawa, that's you. Is Devin Sawa a famous person?